What's going on, everybody? Hotep to the family. Ashe to all my people out there. Welcome back to My Unapologetic Perspective here on the Mighty Motivation Network. This is the podcast where we give our point of view of controversial topics from our experience, Black history, and our knowledge as African Americans. In the words of Maya Angelou, do your best until you know better. And when you know better, do better. So it's important to search for information to discover what you don't know so you can discover your best you. I'm joined today by my co-host. To the right of me is Shaquan Battle.
Yeah.
And to the right of him is Jerome Battle.
What's up?
And I'm your lovely host, Martre, Dion Baker Stevens / Battle, all of that good stuff. Thank everybody for tuning in. Thanks for all the love people have been showing to us on YouTube. If you have not been to our YouTube, go to YouTube, type in the Mighty Motivation Network, hit the subscribe button, and you can catch up on all the latest episodes. Also, go to Facebook, type in My Unapologetic Perspective, and follow that Facebook page for the latest content coming out. How are you guys?
Good.
Everybody good?
You know I'm struggling. Sinuses.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make it through though.
We're gonna dive in today. Any current events y'all want to talk about before we get started? Anything that happened lately that y'all want to comment on?
Yeah. Larry
Okay.
Elders. Thank you, Larry. For
Coon
being
of
the
all
idiot in
coons.
California. Thank you.
Yeah, Larry was the person that was running for governor in LA, calling for the recall election, which ended up he ended up losing because he's a complete idiot. If you don't believe he's a complete idiot, just go to Google, type in his name, and you'll see how much of a complete idiot is. The things that he said recently that slave owners should have get paid for reparations for the property that they lost. He said some other stuff about he would live in a neighborhood with George Zimmerman because George Zimmerman did the right thing in killing of Trayvon Martin, and that he received enough justice just by what he had to deal with the backlash of killing Trayvon Martin. And the list goes on to the idiotic
and
things
on.
this guy's said in the past few years.
So my black voters, that's why you can't always just vote black.
That's right. Exactly.
Especially
That's a
that.
great point. That's a great point. And he did us a favor because without that, Democrats probably would not have went out and voted in this election.
Yeah.
But it was so ridiculous, some of the things he was saying, and so discriminatory against his own kind that even white Democrats went, we need to go vote.
Right.
we can't add it. So thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.
And then the propaganda added to it when I guess the eggs were thrown at him as they should have been. He used that as a political campaign against the left, talking about how he's targeted for his thoughts and his point of views. But whatever, enough of talking about idiot people. Let's dive into it. Today we're going to talk about something very important. It hit close to home of what's been going on probably for the last decade or more. In this, especially when it's talk about African American celebrities or African American leaders, but it's something that has been a detriment to the African American community for decades. You can even probably go back to the 40s and 50s, what we're going to do. But we're going to talk about the effects that drugs have in Black America. When we talk about this topic, because of course we've had some recent passings lately. When you look at the famous people that have passed that have been African American, a lot of it has been drug related.
That's right.
You hate to say that you want people to rest in peace, but we have to give our people information to try to combat some of the overdoses that has been happening, because that's essentially what it is. They call it a tragic situation, which it is, but let's call it what it really is, which is just overdosing. It's no different from your addict on the street that is overdosing on heroin or cocaine or crack. It's just they're put into different type of drugs now. When we talk about prescription drugs, you talk about things that you use as your vice that you may have been using for 20 or 30 years, but the drug market has changed so much that it's no longer just cutting it with baking soda. They're cutting it with fentanyl now. And we seeing that the dramatic changes in overdoses, which we'll get into. But when we talk about, we're going to go through the history of some drugs. in the timeline in the United States when they deal with the African Americans real quick. So when we talk about drugs in Black America, people have been doing opium for thousands of years. This is, we can go all the way back to the original family because plants grow all around, whether it's in Asia, Africa, South America, whatever the case may be. What we call drugs are plants that have been growing all around us for since the beginning. So when we talk about drugs, the first drug that come to mind when we talk about the Black community, let's start with heroin. Because heroin comes in from 1874 to 1920 in the United States, where it was used as pain relief or medicine. When we talk about every drug that we talk about was essentially at one point used for some type of medicine or pain relief.
Right.
But when it's used in its right state of mind, it is for healing, pain relief, and relaxation. But when it is abused, when things get out of hand. But heroin began to become regulated in the United States about 1924 with the Dangerous Drug Act. But the medications were no longer available over the counter. So heroin begins being smuggled by Sicilians to the Italian mob. Is one of the first encounters that you see in the United States with a mass majority of heroin coming in. And the mob, if you ever watched The Godfather, the mob talks about not selling it to their own people.
That's right.
They wanted to sell it to Black people, but the Black drug dealers and how the Black drug dealers sell it to their people because they figure, they'll do anything. So when you talk about drugs, you're talking about, let's just go back to, since so many people are watching Godfather or Harlem, let's just go back to Bumpy Johnson. So Bumpy Johnson started off as running numbers. That was the hustle back then, running numbers and prostitution. And then it eventually come to drugs come into play. So the Italian mob were giving the drugs to Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy Johnson began to correlate this within Harlem and in the New York area, and then all across the United States. But it gets a little bit more complicated than that, than just Bumpy Johnson and the Italian mob. In 1960s, the Sicilian mob meets with the CIA. And for the people who know history, this is not something that should shock anybody, right? Because what essentially happened in the United States was trying to assassinate Fidel Castro. So when trying to assassinate Fidel Castro, understand that Batista was running Cuba before Fidel Castro. Batista was a good friend of the United States due to their, let's call it what it is, racism. It going on in Cuba.
Very similar to United States.
Absolutely.
Right.
So what ends up happening is Fidel Castro takes over Cuba, and the CIA creates a team of former Cubans called anti-communists. And what they do is they try to assassinate Fidel Castro and take back over Cuba. This is all signed off by JFK and Nixon and all of these people. So you got the Bay of Pigs that happened where they're trying to assassinate Fidel Castro on behalf of the CIA and the United States government. Well, it falters, and what ends up happening is the anti-communists that were CIA trained are no longer employed. They had to flee Cuba and come to the United States, and they're no longer employed. So what ends up happening, one way that they know how to make money is smuggling drugs, because they know their way in and out of Cuba, in and out of the United States to smuggle drugs in. So we always can tie drugs back into something that the U.S. government is tied to, and you're going to see why as we're going through this episode. But that's one of the ways that drugs began to come into the United States is after the Bay of Pigs, the anti-communists that were rebels that were along with the United States began bringing in drugs.
Some say that was the plan from the beginning, that they weren't really trying to help the United States and the CIA from the beginning. That was all part of the plan.
Right. And also not just heroin. We just focused on the Black community, but LSD was huge at this time too, because the CIA wanted to use LSD to control soldiers in the way that they want to control them. Goes back to what's the movie with Denzel Washington, Manchurian Candidate or something like that.
Yeah, Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah, man. So it's something similar to that. And then you come across the Vietnam War, and in the Vietnam War is the same exact thing happens. You're fighting communism in Vietnam, but in a place called Laos where the anti-communists are. That's who the United States team up with. But what do they have? They have plants where they grow heroin.
That's right.
So you ship that heroin along with the United States planes and the United States soldiers, and guess where it ends up? In the hands of the United States soldiers who got hooked in Vietnam War on heroin.
American Gangster, you can watch.
Yeah, with Frank
That's
Lucas.
right.
So then you're gonna start seeing heroin really coming into the United States during the Vietnam War. So what ends up happening is soldiers are fighting depression. Then when they get back to the United States, they ain't got no jobs.
That's right.
You know, they ain't got no money in their pocket. So
Seen this
I'm either gonna sell it.
Dead presidents as well.
Dead presidents. I'm either gonna sell it or I'm gonna use it, right? Not only Frank Lucas, you got people like Frank Matthews, who say was a part of the CIA as well. Nicky Barnes, all of those great people. But they were just pawns. People talk about how great, bigger the drug dealers these guys were. They were just pawns.
They were just pawns.
They were just pawns. It was
right.
a bigger thing. Not only that, you also had cops taking the drugs from drug dealers, cutting it, and selling it back. As you watch American Gangster, this was happening. A lot of cops didn't bother drug dealers because they were drug dealers too.
That was actually the first line in American Gangster was when he said, "I work for a man that thought he owned the company, but he ain't own it."
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely. So Nixon declares war on drugs. His administration admitted it. It was a war against left hippies who were on LSD and against black people trying to associate black people with heroin. So Nixon essentially calls it the war on drugs. Now, it wasn't, this was one of the first initial war on drugs. And then in New York, they had the Rockefeller drug laws, which 90% of drug dealers that were sentenced to long terms were black and brown people.
That's right.
So that's where you get the heroin epidemic. Now let's move a little bit further. Cocaine, which derives from a coca plant in South America. Again, a medicine at first. People in Germany, soldiers began to use it in the 1800s to try to take away fatigue. The United States used it in Coca-Cola. You could actually buy it and buy a drink of Coca-Cola in a medicine place and drink it there. But then the Harrison Narcotics Act outlawed cocaine in the United States, and it literally didn't come back popular again until around the 1970s because cocaine was used by mostly white people because it was expensive. So it was a party drug. So they would call it blow. You would Scarface. You would you be in a club, you take the dollar bill, you sniff it up, and it was essentially harmless what white people thought, right?
What's the other movie? Man, New York with the stock exchange.
Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, Wolf of Wall Street.
So cocaine was used by people with money in the 70s and the 80s, and it didn't really hit the inner cities because black people really couldn't afford it. If you watch the movie Fresh, it was like $100 a pop for cocaine. Right. You know what I mean? So while Nixon was cracking down on marijuana, LSD, and heroin, cocaine is coming in with the cartels. Again, Chile, a place in Chile, they was creating it. They was sending it to Pablo Escobar in Colombia, and Pablo Escobar is smuggling it in to Miami, the cartels in California. The kicker is, just goes back to a fight against communists as well. Again, we can always trace this back, right? So in Nicaragua, the United States was helping the rebels with the far left, the far right rebels fight against the communism in Nicaragua. And what they did was they came up with the Bolden Act and said, we're no longer going to fund these people. So Reagan and the CIA continued to secretly fund those rebels down there by allowing them to smuggle drugs in, make money, to buy weapons, and send back down there. Again, if you watch Snowfall, don't just Franklin is a pawn in Snowfall.
Right.
Watch the CIA agent that he works for. He's the head honcho of everything that's going on.
And that's why if on Snowfall, if you watch the last season, that's why the dad was so gung-ho on getting Franklin out of that situation.
It was way much bigger.
It was bigger than him.
Rick Ross or Franklin, whatever you want to call it, they were pawns in this scheme. There was a lot of money being made bigger than what you've seen on the streets of LA. But Ronald Reagan increases the war on drugs, Meanwhile, Nancy Reagan is saying just say no, which is a contradiction because Reagan is the one bringing the drugs in. So again, we see how this happened, but something key happens in cocaine, which is that brought a lot of attention to cocaine, which was Richard Pryor burning himself up by freebasing.
That's right.
And that introduced
crack
cocaine, which crack is a free base form of cocaine made by cooking cocaine powder, water, and baking soda until it forms a solid that can be broken down into individual rocks. And you can sell these rocks at $10 a pop, which inner city now can afford, right? So where cocaine was expensive to purchase, crack was affordable prices for African Americans to be able to come a hold of. But then something else happens. 1985, Len Bias, first round. Was he the first pick?
First pick.
First pick. Dies before he ever gets to play in the Boston
Maryland
Celtics.
Turpin, baby.
The result was it actually wasn't even from crack. They said he actually overdosed from cocaine, not crack, but they made it seem like it was a crack overdose, which means George H. Bush imposed mandatory sentencing laws, which dramatically increased the penalties of possessing or trafficking crack. So that was a 1 to 100 type of sentencing. So you can have 100 grams of cocaine and be sentenced for the same thing as having 1 gram of crack. Right. So to put this in perspective for people who don't understand, if you have 5 sugar packets that you get from like Hardee's, right? That would be essentially a gram, 5 sugar packets. 500 of those sugar packets would be equivalent to cocaine. That's what the sentencing was. So somebody like Pablo Escobar can have 500 grams of cocaine and get sentenced as a 17-year-old who had 1 gram of crack.
That's right.
That's the way that worked, right? So cocaine was looked at as an upscale drug that wasn't harming anybody, and crack was killing America. And they again associate that with African Americans, even though white people were on crack more than black people. But harsh laws came when the drug became associated with black people. And of course, the mandatory minimums with the crime bill with Bill Clinton. Because when you look at Reagan, you had Nixon, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, all were competing on the war on drugs, all trying to make it harsher for drug dealers. But crack was different, right? Because crack didn't just hurt the drug dealers, it hurt the drug users.
Right.
So if you were a drug addict, you were going to jail just as much as the drug dealers when your problem was, I'm addicted to the drug.
Right. Actually, crack hurt more so than the other drugs for another reason too. The violence. The violence that came along with it. If you go back to the 80s, from 1984, 85 until the early 90s, until the crime bill was passed by Clinton in 1996. Obviously, the amount of people that were being murdered due to crack cocaine was ridiculous, and most of those people were young Black Americans. So I want people to realize that we're talking about how this system got us to where we are, but we weren't only the victims of the people that were selling it, we were also the victims of the ones that were being killed due to it.
Because whenever you get drugs, you're going to get money. Whenever you get money, you get power, you get territory. And then that's when the guns come into effect. Snowfall, that's why Snowfall is so good, right? Snowfall started off Franklin selling drugs. Everything was all good. Yeah. Then the next season, you see guns everywhere. It's a war everywhere, because whenever you have an inflow of money coming in, everybody wants a piece of that action. And then that's when you get conflict, and you get rivals, and you get gangs, and you get all of these other things involved. And now it's come from making money to a power struggle on the streets that innocent bystanders are usually the victims of what's going on in the streets. But crack cocaine was also an attack on the Black community, because the news made it seem like it was COVID, like it was an epidemic, it was a plague. Right. Those are the words that they used, right? So it was an attack on the Black community. They even went as far as saying that crack hurt the pregnant female's baby, and it came up with the term of crack babies, which there's no evidence that's scientifically true, that crack was found in the system of babies being born. But that was the thing that they was running into, and they were sentencing women that were pregnant for that, because they said that they were endangering the baby by taking these drugs. but it locked up so many people, and we're gonna get to that a little bit later. But the last one I'm gonna just throw in there for good measure, which is alcohol. Now, most people don't think alcohol is a drug, but it is something that is fatally hurtful to the black community as a heroin or cocaine or any other drug, because liquor can cause you can overdose over liquor as well.
Yeah, that's important too. You mentioned two things that go in correlation with drugs and how they basically invaded this country. It also incorporates two other aspects: your guns and tobacco. So when we think about alcohol, tobacco, and guns or firearms, that's where you got the ATF from.
Right.
So one of the reasons why the mafia, the Italian mafia, did not want to associate with drugs and guns is because that brought a different type of law enforcement. They brought an ATF.
Attention to you.
That's right. So they wanted to refrain from that. If you watch any of the older mobster movies, they would always separate themselves from anybody that was selling drugs, because obviously that brought a different type of attention, usually in the form of ATF.
So what if they were like that? Why do you think we would do it? What was the reason that somebody like Bumpy Johnson or Frank Matthews would say, okay, if y'all not gonna sell it to y'all people, we will?
The thing is it's business 101. I mean, you learn this in high school. Where there's a demand, there's going to be somebody that has a supply. You have to meet that demand. Who better to do it than me? Right.
They're gonna get it from somewhere.
Exactly. They're gonna get it from somewhere. And I can speak from personal experiences. Somebody's going to sell it, right? As far as the person that's buying it, nobody's forcing them to do it, right? At least that's how we thought. I have no understanding of addiction whatsoever. So obviously that person is willingly coming to purchase something that could do harm to them. Somebody's going to sell it, might as well be me, right? So obviously that's what we did. And if you take an environment, if you take a community that's impoverished, there's no jobs, the living conditions are horrible, there's a lot of people. We talked about it on previous podcasts. There's no economical development. There's no hope. However, you got this over here that's just, it's there, right? So people need their grass cut. There's people going to cut their grass.
Right.
People want to get high. There's people that's going to sell the drugs to them.
Absolutely.
And to do that, at least if you go all the way back to the 60s and 70s, to do that, you have to own an area. You have to own the territory. How do you do that? You got to have people. You got to have guns. You have to be willing to fight for your territory. And thus, that's what you had when you look at the 80s with crack cocaine and then going into the 90s. So we were willing to do that. We're already a people who are angry already. I mean, look at our situation. Look at what's happened to us, over the 400 plus years.
So you think it's a product of the environment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we talked about this before too. There in the past, there's been so many people who believe that financial advancement is an equalizer. They don't care where you got the money. We've seen it before. As long as you can buy a house that's not in the hood, you can pay your bills, people don't question where the money comes from. You're treated differently, right? So the best way for me to be treated differently is earn more money. Nobody cares where it comes from. I mean, you hear some of these people doing interviews, they can't even speak proper English. They're making millions of dollars and they're treated so differently than a person that's well-spoken that work at McDonald's, right? Money becomes the equalizer to so many people.
Absolutely.
Real quick, if I could read something Jay said on You Must Love Me. He said, through my thirst, it didn't help you. I just made things worse. I hated me and everybody that created crack. Had me thinking the newest kicks and the latest gat. He was talking about when he sold his mom cocaine. So like Dad said, it's a supply, it's going to be a demand. So if my mom going to use it, then I might as well sell it to you.
And we glorify it. You can look at rap today. I mean, you can imagine how rap was in the late 80s, early 90s, but you can listen to rap today. What do rappers glorify? How much money they make? They're not making it owning their own businesses outside of the drug game. They're not making it doing movies, right? How are they making it? Selling drugs, right? So we've always glorified. So not only we do glorify selling it, we glorify the addiction, especially now. And I know everybody wants to separate weed from all these other drugs, and that's fine. You can do that. But at the end of the day, you have people that are glorifying getting high. So if you're glorifying, you can separate it all you want. Money is green, right? So if you want it, You're going to get high, somebody's going to sell it. So we're glorifying it. In opposed to our counterparts who do not glorify it. You don't see somebody who sniffed cocaine going in the press conference talking about how they sniff cocaine, right? They don't even want to admit that they smoke and inhale weed, right?
Bill Clinton.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, we treat it differently than our counterparts. Thus, we're going to be treated differently in the end. And that's what we're saying too.
Give me your take on just the history of what we went through on the drugs.
Well, real quick, far as the drugs, I mean, since 91, convicted blacks are being incarcerated for nonviolent low-level drug offenses. Most blacks locked up in violent crimes aren't violent crimes like rape, murder, but they locked up for petty offenses, drug offenses. So starting all the way back, you know, and it's songs, it's movies that talk about this, that how drugs was pumped into the black neighborhood. For what reason? I mean, you can come up with a lot of them, but it was essentially of kill yourselves.
Oh,
y'all sell it, we lock you up. You sell it to your own people, they're gonna die. I mean, you look at the hardcore drugs like LSD, cocaine, meth. They're used by white people,
right?
More than black people. Even alcohol,
it's rarely talked about.
It's rarely talked about because if you're seen as a crackhead, you're seen as somebody that'll commit a crime.
Yeah.
Versus somebody that's on meth. You know, the crackhead that came from. I'm not sure if white people gave that to us or did we give it to ourselves.
Right, because the song "Your Mama on Crack," Mama on Crack, yes, stuff like that. We want money so bad, we want power so bad, we want control of our territories so bad, and we got it. It just was a detriment to black people.
You know, and speaking about the history, I agree with you 100%. And I'm gonna go one step further. I know we like to separate alcohol, but let's talk about prohibition. Right? Prohibition didn't come about because they felt that alcohol was detrimental to the human being. It came about because at the time there was no way to regulate the money that was being made from the sale of it.
Right.
So until the government was able to carouse that part, right, it was outlawed. So obviously what happens is it becomes the new crack. It becomes the new drug, something that's illegal that people still want. Remember, business 101, where there's a demand, somebody is going to have a supply. So it became money for those that sold it. So the government said, well, we can't do that. We have to make it legal, but we want to be able to control it,
right?
And we want to be able to control not the use of it, but the money generated from it, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, if you look at now, one of the leading killers in the United States is alcohol related, right? Alcohol related deaths. So they could care less about the human. It's about the money. But to go one step further, I tell people all the time, I'm the son of a murdered mother. My mother died from throat cancer by way of alcohol and cigarettes. So I feel like I'm the son of a murdered mother. And when I think about alcohol, I think about any type of addiction. Okay, people can say cigarettes not addictive. They can say weed's not addictive. You can say what you want to.
Then stop doing it.
Stop doing it. Right. Addiction can be something, and I'll tell you today, I still don't understand it today. I've never been addicted to anything in my life, so I don't know what addiction is. Although I know that it has taken a lot of people away from me.
And we are back again. Pops, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, just talking about addiction. People like to separate hard drugs the same way they like to separate hard alcohol from beer. You hear people say, "Oh, it's just beer," or it's just weed. Until you've lost a loved one due to some of those things that we like to say just in front of, you won't understand what I'm going through. You know, and that we talk about taking away people in the physical sense, but not just them no longer being on this earth, but that person no longer being the person that I know,
right?
Being completely different. and not just when they're using, but even when they're not using, they are not the same person anymore. In fact, we had a term for people when they got high or drunk. We used to say they're different. Me and Eugene, my brother Eugene, who doesn't drink or smoke either, we used to say they're different. Such and such is different, meaning they're high or drunk. So my personal experiences obviously has helped develop who I am. And I am not a proponent of those type of things. So obviously I'm biased. Whenever we talk about drugs and alcohol, I'm always going to be biased. That's who I am. That's not going to change. And I'm not saying that my opinion is right, but opinions are like, buttholes. All of them stink, right? But I can talk about mine because I clean mine, all right?
Right.
So
from the effects of drugs, especially when we talk about the sentencing aspect of the cocaine and crack, we got a family member who is a victim of that, if you want to say that. He got arrested. Again, we were 4 or 5 years old, and I'm 31. He's still in prison doing time for that because of the difference between crack and cocaine at the time. Now, they took some off the sentence because of the law that changed that made it equivalent, but he's still not out yet. So that just tells you somebody that was out here in the streets during that time period selling crack cocaine, that he got murdered. I've seen people murder people and go in and get out, and he's still in there for a drug crime. As much as the Derek Chauvin's case wanted to make me happy with the 23 years that he received. I watched my cousin get 40 for
drug
crack, for just crack. And if it would have been coke, it might not have been 40.
That's
you know
right.
what I mean? So
they also amended the law and with the crime bill too, that they changed drug convictions, especially if you were in the possession of crack, which they call a controlled substance. So a Schedule II controlled substance. But if you caught in possession of that, along with a firearm, they made it a violent crime. So even with the reduction in some of the sentences that are cocaine related, there was only for non-violent offenders. So if you had a conviction with the possession of a firearm, none of these breaks in the law, the changes in the law affect your sentence, right? So if you got 25 or 30 years for possession of crack cocaine, but you also was in the possession of a gun, guess what? You still got that same sentence.
Right. So what we've seen from that, especially from the crime bill of Clinton, was we saw mass incarceration. We saw police go from community oriented to military style, which we still see today with the military style. This goes into the battery ram into people's doors.
That's right.
Just tearing up people's neighborhoods, doing whatever. The stop and frisk, all of these things come into effect when it comes to the drug things. And first time offenders were getting 15 to 20 years on a couple of grams of crack.
That's right.
Was it Clinton? Either Clinton. It was one. It was either Reagan, Clinton, or Bush. I think it was Bush, actually. Bush had a informant buy drugs in front of the White House, arrested the person that sold him the drugs so he could take the drugs and do a speech on TV about how drugs is affecting the community. But he the one that orchestrated the drug deal in front of the White House.
Yeah, when we talked a couple of weeks ago, we talked about black pawns, right?
Yeah.
We talked about blacks that were used for an agenda, either push an agenda or establish an agenda. When we talk about drugs, there's a black pawn that comes in the mind that you guys probably heard his name because you probably heard me mention it before. He was the mayor of D.C. for many, many years, Marion Barry. And Marion Barry was caught on tape smoking crack cocaine with a prostitute. And here's the thing. He was caught on tape because people were aware that he was smoking crack. So rather than do the right thing and get the brother some help, they decided, let's set him up and put him on camera, right? So they can show you ultimately what blacks and black politicians, because the two went together, do. And America felt like this was an exact representation of Black America and Black Americans in politics.
So when we look at the effects of the drug, it's a book that I read called "They Came Before Columbus" by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, and he was talking about something totally different. But one of the things that he talked about was how Africans introduced oral smoking of tobacco for pleasure and relaxation. They used tobacco for money, magic, and meditation. The use of cocaine spans thousands of years, like I talked about earlier, but knowledge of its mind altering function, what we call hallucinations. People know about that going back, 2000 BC. For centuries, the Native Americans, Africans, Asians were using these tobaccos when it came to their rituals. And these rituals, when you have these hallucinogens plants going at the time, it allows you to connect with what we could call the higher power.
That's right.
To do certain things. So it was used in a spiritual essence. But when it gets into the hands of certain people where it can be abused, number one, or it can be profitable, is what changes the aspect of what we call the plants. Nothing's different from coffee. Nothing's different from sugar. At one time, sugar was the drug.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? Sugar did something to Europeans that they never, they would do anything for that sugar. You know what I mean? They would do anything for that coffee.
I got both of them in here.
They would do anything for that tobacco, right? That opium. So they were all used for different reasons, but you can become addicted to these things because there are plants that can be isolated into a drug. Any plant that by indigenous people for the purpose of extracting it by the Europeans was used for making money.
And also, if you look at, most of the drugs that came over here, it wasn't until like the opiate in the 1870s. White people used those because there was no aspirin or anything like that. But it wasn't until the Chinese came over in the 1870s that, they went home and smoked the opiate, much like the white people went home and took a shot of whiskey, is when you get the first opiate prohibition laws directed at the Chinese.
Oh yeah, watch the movie. Watch the show Warrior. Warrior is a great show to watch. But let's go into why do we sell drugs? Why do African Americans decide to sell drugs to their people? Again, we talked about earlier, money. It was an opportunity for the unemployed. There were times, especially during the 60s, where unemployment was at an all-time low. Anytime you come back home after a war, whether you talk about the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the World War II, whatever, you could always go back to American wars. Whenever African Americans come back, they don't have, we talked about this on the podcast before, they didn't have access to the health care that white soldiers had. So when they come back from war, they're still using the same drugs that they were using during the war to try to heal them. But also they didn't have the job opportunities awaiting them when they got back, right? Money is power. Like people would, some people would sell it to their own mother and father if it mean that they could have power or some sense, And you always talk about it all the time. A lot of people, they don't do it because they need to do it. They love the lifestyle. You like the money, you like the clothes, you like the jewelry, you like the women that come with it. In the crack epidemic, you saw 16-year-olds with BMWs ain't even have a driver's license. But I got a BMW.
But if you look at the average drug dealer, probably the drug dealer that most people know, when you look at them, you see them driving the cars, they got the nice clothes, the jewelry, whatever, they're at the club, they're doing all this stuff. But the first time they get arrested, you wonder, why didn't he get out? Right? So the first thing you think is he has no bond. Then you find out later on, he got a $10,000 bond. He's still in jail.
No,
where's the money?
And he got a court-appointed lawyer.
And he got a court-appointed attorney.
Biggie said it best when he was selling drugs. He got locked up. All the money for the lawyer was the money for the bond.
Absolutely. So, you look at these people and you think they're really making money. It's really about the lifestyle. We used to call them hotel hustlers, right? They get the hotel room for the weekend, right? They hustle all week, the party, get the sneakers on Friday, hit the club, get a hotel room for a couple of days, Monday back on the grind, right? They're not making money. It's a lifestyle. It's like a job.
But a lot of people also don't understand what we call civil asset forfeiture, right?
That's right.
A lot of people don't understand this. That if you get caught selling drugs, or not even get caught, if they think that you're selling drugs,
reasonable suspicion
in your home, your car, any place where your property, the government can seize that property. The money, the drugs, all of it goes where? To the government.
Absolutely.
So who benefits more from black drug dealers that are going to be arrested eventually?
That's right. Now, let's put this in real perspective so people can understand. That's an important fact, right? For those that are selling drugs that live in your mama house or live with your baby's mama, right? And you're selling drugs, they can seize that home, right? So that means not only do you go to jail, but your family could lose their home because you're selling drugs. If you don't believe me, I'm speaking from experience, okay? This is not something somebody told me. I'm telling you, this is the law. They can take your property. They can take the property of your parents or your girlfriend, whoever they want to, where you're living in their home, and they can say they got a reason to believe that they benefited from you selling drugs. So keep that in mind if you still live with your mama or you live with one of your girlfriends or baby mothers.
Yeah, and for some people who say, well, they had to know they were going to get caught at some point.
Nobody sells drugs thinking they're going to get caught.
If you look at somebody like Rick Ross, he knew the police didn't care because he was working with the police. Yeah. You either pay the police off because they're benefited from it too, right?
It's easy money. Nobody's thinking about what happens if I get caught. They're thinking about what happens if I don't get caught.
Right.
They're not thinking about what happens when I get caught.
You know, we were talking about New York earlier. You know, New York police officers will allow the drug dealers to sell it. They'll catch you with it, give it back to you. Tell your boss I'll let you go.
Yeah.
That means your boss gonna come pay me to leave you alone whenever I see you.
They just had a situation in Florida, Miami, where two cops were doing the bad boys thing, you know, Mike Lowry, whatever, that were doing exactly what you just said. They were having drug dealers sell drugs and give them a percentage. We won't bust you and we'll bust the competition, but you got to pay us.
Absolutely.
Right? So obviously, whenever there's money to be made, somebody is going to make it.
Right.
The question is who? Yeah. Somebody's going to make it.
Right. And for some people say, you know, why did they don't just get a job? There was a commercial going around late 80s, early 90s. Was about a kid, probably about 18 or 19. It was a drug awareness commercial about the kid walking from his stoop through the streets, passing the drug dealers, and then he go to work at McDonald's. And some people say that's the way that we should do. But I read something that said in the 80s, minimum wage of working at McDonald's was $3.35 an hour. Who the hell is that gonna feed?
Yeah, I mean, you would have drug dealers. I was one of them that people would say, "Why don't you get a job?" And I would say, "How much money you make in a year?" And they would say, and I was like, "I make that in a week."
Right.
I know people that was making that in a day.
Right.
So shut up. You know what I mean? Mind your business.
Right.
So obviously it's about the money, but it's really about the lifestyle because I don't have to go punch a clock every day. Mm-hmm. Nobody tells me what to do or when to do it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on boss.
If one of my friends say, "Yo, let's go to Miami," the question was when you want to leave, right? It's no question about I got to get off work. When you want to leave and how you want to go. You want to fly, you want to drive, what you want to do, you know? So it's the lifestyle. And you learn the lifestyle from the things that you see people in front of you doing. You know, I remember, you know, when being at Marcy Projects with my cousin Jazz, he pointed out this guy that was like notorious, and Jay's mentioned him on a few albums. And I won't mention names because some of these people are still alive, so I don't want to do that to him. But I remember he kind of telling us the story about when he went to prison. He was like, yeah, vacation. It was a vacation, man. He come back out. This 1985, 86, he got the very first Jordans that ever hit the street. Jordans wasn't even being sold in stores yet. We was like, what are those? They ugly as hell. Jordans. Nobody knew what they were. He just got out of jail that day. Mm-hmm. And to him, going to prison was a vacation. A vacation. Mm-hmm. That's not how I view prison, you know, but that's how he viewed it. But we looked up to people like that because they weren't honest with us. Mm-hmm. They didn't tell us that when you go to prison, you get that felony on your record and you can't vote and you lose friends. And while you're in prison, you lose relatives. And when you get out, it's going to be difficult for you to get a job and difficult for you to go back into the game. So once you're convicted, it's even more difficult to go back to doing what you were doing before.
And that's actually the point I was going to make next is once you get that F on your report card, then you essentially get out trying to land back on your feet, and you're going to go back to what you used to.
That's right.
Right. So a lot of people, they get out, they try to find a job. They might find a job. Somebody like might have 3 or 4 kids already, and you realize this ain't gonna cut it.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Especially because now in the court dates, you're not just getting time, you got to pay restitution back.
Yep.
So you got to pay court costs, you got to pay lawyers, you got to pay all of this stuff back. You're so in debt, it's like, dang, I got to go back to what I was doing anyway.
And if you get kids, you got that child support.
That's funny thing to pull it from, but life after lockup.
That's right.
Dude got out of jail, got his first job. He was like, yeah, man, I got paid today. Opened this check. Restitution took all of it. And he told his girl, he was like, for all of this, why am I working? I might as well go back to selling drugs.
Yeah.
That's the system.
You got to eat. It's a survival.
Yeah.
It's a survival.
Mill talk about that all the time, about how the system works, man. And the system, once you get in that system, it's hard to get out that loop. You really have to be strong-willed, motivated, and understand that I don't want that for me. But if you have kids, you also got to say, I don't want that for my kids.
Yeah.
To answer your previous question, sometimes as Black people, we look at what we don't have versus what somebody has. Like Big says, Scarface, King of New York. I want to be it. He's seen the lifestyle that he was living, and Big was looking at his situation and was like, yo, I want that. Whatever I got to do to get that, I'll do it.
Right.
On The Wire, he said, the reason why we hustle is we hustle, y'all try to knock it. That's how the game goes.
Right.
You can't send us down here where we can sell drugs freely, because that's not what the hustle is. The hustle is we try to sell it, you try to knock it.
Right.
I know for me growing up, with people that, are my age, the great kids, great household, and then they started selling drugs because either their older cousin was doing it or the lifestyle. The problem is when you start having kids, you now leave those kids out here to do the very thing that they see you doing, going back and forth to jail. So you can't get mad at the system when your child is going back and forth to jail when you're in jail.
That's right.
Paid in Full movie was perfect. When after he got shot, the EMTs asked him, who did this to you? And he said, I did this to me. And it goes from him working in the cleaners to seeing his best friend making all of this money. He's like, yo, you really out here making this money. You showing up with this car. You got this jewelry on. You doing all this. I want that.
Right.
Now I'm slaving in this laundry.
None of that.
Yeah. So we see that effect that can have.
It's appealing.
Yeah.
It's appealing, and it appeals to those who have nothing.
Yeah, and I mean,
it appeals to those who have no hope.
He told them when they was playing ball, me and you gonna have mansion business in 5 years. 5 years.
Yes.
Thinking more like days.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And they did.
Yeah.
they did. But
even when he got out of jail and his man said, yo, I see you shining, the first thing he did was tucked it in.
Yeah. Because it was the lifestyle though. But let's look at the other side of it real quick. Why do we do drugs? Of course, you got the trauma of poverty, unemployment. And I believe when we talk about rap music, we talk about us glorifying it, but I believe that Grandmaster Flash wasn't trying to glorify it. It's a jungle sometimes that makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It was a reality at the time.
Yeah.
He's talking about what's going on. I believe we took the reality and made it our future.
Yeah, you've talked about it at the beginning too, is that a lot about getting high is also the prestige to come with it. If you watch any of the movies talking about the celebrities, especially the music celebrities, the first thing they get offered when they're working on that record deal is they get offered cocaine, right? Go ahead, take a snort. And to not do it is very difficult, because if you don't, you can end up like Stacey Lattisaw. For those that don't know who that is, Google her and she'll tell you. You can hear her story about the industry. But the industry puts people in a situation to be accepted. You have to do certain things. We can even go to now like R. Kelly, the trial going on with R. Kelly. For him to help people, they had to do certain things, right? That's always been the case in the industry for the most part. You want to be in the industry, what are you willing to do? Show me you down. Let me hit that line, right? Once it happens, that's where the addiction comes in. So you do it to be accepted, to get something, and then the addiction kicks in. So now you're in it, right? And then what do when you're in that position? You do the same thing to the next person. So obviously
it's a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle.
Right.
And the only way to break that cycle is you have to do what we're doing. You have to talk to people.
Right.
Talk to people and give them another option. Tell them that you don't have to do that to be accepted. But the drug game has went so far to the other end. It's unreal, because we were talking about off air about prescription drugs, where people perceive prescription drugs totally different than how they view, narcotics or, illegal drugs.
Because it looks cleaner. Because you get it from the doctor.
Absolutely. Not knowing that, or not realizing or understanding that if you have a prescription, and just be real, in Black households, we do it all the time. If I get an antibiotic for a sinus infection and I don't take all of them, and somebody in my family gets sick, here you go. Right? Not realizing that's against law. You can't do that, right? But that person having that prescription drugs, especially when they were already prescribed it by a doctor, but they ran out because they're using it the wrong way, and they get somebody else to get a prescription for them. We talked about it off air. That's what happened to Prince. He was taking prescription drugs for a legitimate reason. However, he was using it so frequently that his prescription didn't last the amount of time that he needed it to. So he got somebody else get the drugs for him.
And that happens a lot. A lot of people, you had a back injury. They prescribe you oxycodone for the pain or whatever the case may be, and you take the full tabs, and then after you even feel better, but for now, every pain that you have,
you're gonna take it.
You want that.
That's right.
This happened to a lot of people. For me, I didn't have a drug problem. Well, if you want to call alcohol a vice, but it was the escape from reality, because a lot of people, we talk about using it for oppression and stress. The number one reason people use drugs or alcohol is because you're partying. You want to have fun. That's where you're introduced to it. And then once you see the effect that it could have, that it can take you away from reality sometimes, now when you're depressed, you want it. And it just continues to spiral downhill from now. And now you're partying depressed. And this drug is taking you away from reality to the point where you're not even in tune in reality.
That's right.
And now reality is you're behind on your bills.
That's right.
Reality is you ain't taking care of your kids. Reality is you in debt. Reality is you ain't doing all of your responsibilities. You lost your job. You missed 3 days of work. You called in sick. It starts to spiral downhill because it went from fun to stress to now I have no clue what's happening.
That's right. And addiction is real, obviously. Like I said, I really don't understand it, but I've watched where you hear jokes about it, but it's not jokes. It's real. If you have a drug on the street that kills people, a rational person would go, I don't want that.
I don't want that, yeah.
An addict could go, where can I get that from?
Like don't be a menace. Like, after he overdosed, pass that.
That's right. Let me get that. Yeah. Just this weekend, we were at a club, and this girl was drinking, and she was running around. And in my mind, I was like, yeah, don't drink whatever she's drinking.
Somebody else's
real people are going, let me get to her where she at.
Right.
You know what I mean? So obviously addiction is real.
Right.
And I think people need to start facing that addiction and finding out, what can I do to get past my addiction? Because obviously we talked about it, that it can become an issue that your kids are watching you, that they can in turn end up doing the same thing that you do. And you're continuing that cycle. You need to break that cycle.
I'm going to throw in one, before we take a quick commercial break, I'm going to throw in one little black fact for you guys. We have in our body what we call melanin. Melanin was founded essentially by doctors after the Vietnam War, where black soldiers had this black liquid in them more than the white soldiers. And melanin is a molecule inside your pineal gland that allows you to vibrate at a higher frequency, allows you to think faster, but it mostly in scientific phenotypes, determines how darker your skin is, how the color of your eyes and the color of your hair. You know, black people, the more melanin you have, the blacker you'll be, the blacker your hair will be, the browner your eyes. This is why we don't get this is why we can be in the sun and not get sunburned, not have to wear sunglasses, those type of things. But inside that melanin is also what they call alkaloid. Alkaloid is something that's inside the melanin. Now, what's also alkaloid is also inside every drug. So when black people have a harder time with addictions because you have so much melanin that you have so much alkaloid in your melanin, and there's so much alkaloid in that drug that it's harder for you to break free of it because both of those things are like magnets that come together. So that's just a quick black fact for you for the people who like to talk about their melanin popping. And melanin alkaloid is also in melanin. Alkaloid is also in every drug that you find.
That's deep. You almost should have said that at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, I think he just found his clip.
That's deep.
Yeah.
We're gonna take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. And we are back. Apologize to the viewers on YouTube. The video cut off, but we're gonna keep the audio, and we're gonna probably put up a picture where it talks about when we're talking. So it ain't gonna be no video for about 15, 16 minutes. I apologize, but it was good.
Yeah,
that I
don't
can't take
skip
it out.
that part.
Yeah,
don't skip
I can't take it out because it was good.
That
So
was
the
good.
audio will be there. So just bear with us for like 15 minutes where it's not gonna be any video. All right. Appreciate it. But we're gonna jump in on again just how the effects of drugs happen. You know, the consequences of being on drugs is, of course, landing and maintaining a job. You know, I've seen people who claim that they don't have a drug problem. If they can't keep a job, you could probably start to look at some of the effects. There probably is drugs,
or some type of addiction.
Right. Impaired judgment, lack of sleep, drug use can make you perform poorly. And you won't be able to excel at your duties at jobs. So a lot of people get fired because now you might have a job, but you ain't performing at a level that you're supposed to be performing at because of the drugs. In the long run, desperation from addiction can lead to stealing, lying, excessive absences, and other undependable behaviors that an employer will find unacceptable. Drug use can take a toll on your mental health. Some people use it for their mental health and don't understand that it's only making things a lot worse. You know, you get your high, and there's always going to be a low.
Sometimes
you know what I mean?
Extreme low.
Yeah, it's always going to be. You know, I asked the person in jail one time. I said, you know, what? Tell me why y'all do meth, because I don't understand it. Right? He said, man, because I be up 5 days in a row without any sleep. I get so much done. Then he was like, but then I'll sleep for 3 days because I'm so exhausted and tired that I hit my low. And I'm like, so you mean tell me you could have just kept the regular schedule and got exactly what you needed to get done and not have to experience any of that? And he's like, yeah, kind of. I'm like, all right, okay.
But that's nowadays with these drugs, people taking uppers, they taking downers, they taking uppers and down. They don't know what the hell they take.
They just mixing anything, you know what I'm saying? You know, just mixing anything together, and that's dangerous. You know, when you mix liquor with certain drugs, you mix cocaine with certain drugs, with your pills, you break that down and you mix the cocaine with the pills.
Yeah.
And people are so shocked when we see overdoses, but we shouldn't, because we're doing a lot of things with drugs that's not meant to be done with drugs, and our body can't naturally take it.
Right.
So the more you abuse the drug, the more you need to get the same effect, and therefore the more money you need to spend to support the habit. So you're losing a lot of money when you're addicted to drugs.
That's the other part, is when you don't have the money to support the habit. Now that's when the criminal things come in, because now you're robbing, you're stealing, you're killing, you're doing all of these things to meet that habit.
Anything for the drug. That's what happened with the crack epidemic, because the crack, once you smoke crack, the high didn't last long.
Right.
So that's why they would say they coming back like later on today. They coming back because the high is gone and they need some more. So whenever you run out of $10 bills to give to the drug man, you still in toasters, microwaves, anything to go back and get that high. But it also affects the family structure. Because the more someone abuses the drugs, the more their priorities shift toward their drug of choice. and you end up hurting a lot of people close to you because you put the drug first. You know, it's priority over the kids. It's priority over the marriage. You steal, you lie, you have a short temper, lack of patience, decreased interest from others, and self-serving habits. All of these things, and you just see friendships fall apart, relationships fall apart.
That's right.
Everything falls apart because the only thing you thinking about is what you need that the drug can provide for you. You're not thinking about what everybody else around you.
And I think that
is
might be
saying.
one of the most important effects of addiction that I think a lot of people overlook. Because we always talk about being able to maintain a job, right? That's like job one, because you can't do much without having finances.
Right.
But one of the areas that I think is that's impacted more than any is what he talked about: relationships. Not just with your significant other, but with your kids, with friends and other family members. That impact, I think, is probably more so than the financial part, because the financial part you can fix, right? You can go get a job and you can be what people call a functional drug addict or alcoholic, which I hate. But you can go out and you can go to work every day and you can make money. But the ones that cannot be repaired because you're still doing the drugs or alcohol is those relationships.
You burn the bridges already.
You're burning bridges all around, because those are the people that still see you for who you are, which is an addict. You know, somebody that's choosing the addiction or the drug or alcohol over the relationship, over the kids, over the friendships. And you can't fix those.
Right. That's why I love The Wire so much. Bubs on The Wire, every season he tried to get clean. And it was one season where he was clean for a good amount of time, and he went to go stay with his sister. And whenever his sister had to go to work, she'd be like, all right, you got to leave the house. And he's like, come on, I can stay here. I'm clean now. She's like, nah, we've done this before. You've been clean for months, and then I come home and my TV gone and all this other stuff.
That's right.
So even though I love you to death, at some point I got to draw the line.
That's right.
And Bubs understood that, because he understood that he burned some of those bridges, even though he was getting clean. You could be clean for 10 years. I don't even think there's a such thing as being clean.
That's right.
Even
you're still an addict.
Me being clean from alcohol for almost 10 years, I still don't think it's one taste away. You know what I'm saying? It's one beer away. So when people say, you know, you can have it and not, no, I understood the control that I lost back then. So I understand that's not out of me yet. I understand the smell. I understand when I watch a movie and I see the elite people, you know, they got the little small cup, and you want some wine, you want some vodka, you want some Hennessy, and they pour a little joint and they just drink it, and I'm like, dang, that look cool.
Right.
But I'm like, dang, I've been there before.
Right.
Just because they make it look cool, I'm not done with the addiction. So beating the addiction goes on every single day for the rest of your life once you've been there before.
It's kind of like what Braun said when he got hurt, when he said he'll never be 100% again.
Right.
Once you get hurt, you will never be 100% again.
Because you remember that feeling. You remember what you did to people. You remember how you acted. All of that stuff is still in the back of your mind. But one thing that the drug, especially the crack cocaine era, did to the family structure was it took away the black mother. That's why I said what I said earlier, that it wasn't just the drug dealer. It was a crime amongst the drug user. And when the black woman became the drug user, you lost the mother
and the father,
the wife, a nurturer, the carer, the lover, the backbone of the black community was lost during the crack cocaine era.
Yeah, and you lost the father because they were on both sides. They were the drug dealer and the user.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you lost the family. So when you seen so many kids go into what we call the system, it's because the black woman got lost in the shuffle when we just talk about the mass incarceration of black men. But the woman was the one that struggled. This is why you see the addiction, the black grandmother take over. We still see it today. My case too. When you see the black grandmother taking care of the child, why? Because the addiction got a hold of us that we put the kid to the side. And that's something that we have to deal with. So when people say that the black grandparent taking care of other people's kid is because our generation or the parents allowed the drug to come in between our priorities and responsibilities that the older black women took into their support system and raised the kids. And we still see it today
Nah,
where
that's
the
real.
grandparents are raising the kids because of the addiction that's still going on in our community.
That's right.
And I'm gonna be honest with you, once that happens, it's hard to get things back to normal because in my personal experience, my daughter has an attachment to my mother, and my mother has an attachment to my daughter. So being that my mother raised my daughter during my addiction stage of alcohol, who am I to come in and say, all right, it's my responsibility now?
That's right.
Right.
And what are those effects going to be?
Right.
Right.
So we just saw that on Godfather of Harlem with Bumpy Johnson and his daughter. I don't know how true it was, but we saw that where it took place and they all came together and said, look, it's village time now. Know who your real parents is, and now we're all going to do it together. But that's some of the effects that the drugs had. That's some of the effects that the addiction has on the black community. Is you see that grandparents take on responsibility. I know grandparents that are retired that still have to work because they're taking care of their kids'
Right.
kids.
That's right.
You know?
And that's, you also see with younger kids being drug dealers or, you know, having a long record, because when dad is in jail or not around and mom get addicted, now it's the older siblings' job to go out and make something happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a vicious cycle.
I'll let y'all close.
You go ahead, Shakur.
Nah, this is your field. So.
Yeah. Actually, my field is basically it's my personal experiences. And obviously, like I said before, I'm biased in so many aspects of this conversation. But at the same time, I have a high level of anger towards addiction. Mainly, the first part is for myself because I contributed to the demise of those in the black community as a drug dealer. I contributed to the things that I stand against today. And it almost makes me feel hypocritical when I talk about it because I was part of the problem at one point. And then, of course, obviously, like I said, what happened to my mom and what I see happening to people that I love every day that have addiction issues. Sometimes it's hard for me to even fathom. Like I said, I don't understand addiction. And I want to ask them, why can't you just stop? If you can control it and it's not a big deal, just stop. It's sort of like people tell me all the time, have you ever eaten frog legs? It tastes just like chicken. Give me the chicken, right? So when people say I can stop whenever I want, why not just stop? The problem is the addict does not see all the effects that I see.
Yeah.
Right? They don't see that.
Well, it's tunnel vision. We have tunnel
Absolutely.
vision. Right.
And so for me personally, makes it very difficult for me to understand. But here's the kicker. Makes it even more difficult for me to help that person.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how to help them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that me and my brother was always tasked with is actually going to the store and buying my mom the beer, right? And cigarettes. How the hell am I gonna say no? It's still my mother.
Right.
You know, and people say, well, I wouldn't buy it for him. Yeah, don't buy it for Helen and find out what happens.
Right.
Right. So going to the store and actually buying it. So I contributed to the thing that murdered her. Because I didn't have the strength to say, no, mom, not buying it. Because anybody that knows my mother knows that when she didn't have it, she was a different person.
Right.
So when she had it, it was a person you could deal with, right? So to avoid that storm, I would go to the store and buy it. So I have to deal with that every day of my life and saying I contributed to her being murdered by cancer and, of course, by way of alcohol and cigarettes. You know, so for me, it's a personal experience that's not going to change. Something I'm going to have to deal with every day. And I'm trying to deal with it every day. But it's tough. So when I see people doing it now that I love and care about, even when you were going through it, I'm not going to say I handled it the best. I was honest with you. I gave you my perspective and said, hey, here it is. That's not what I would tell somebody to tell their kids.
Right.
But I'm biased in my approach because I'm biased in how I feel about it. And it's made me who I am.
Now, I don't understand drug addiction. I don't even know if it's a thing, but I have addictive personality. So that means if I start doing something, it's hard for me to stop doing it. So that's one reason why I can't smoke weed, because I know if I start smoking weed, it's gonna be hard for me to stop. I had an addiction. I had a sex addiction. and it was hard for me to stop. But like you said, I didn't realize how it was affecting my kids, my wife, Bake, because I was living with Bake. I didn't realize how it was affecting you, mom, other dad. I didn't understand until, and I remember it vividly. I remember we were sitting at Bake's house, and he sat on the couch and he looked at me and was like, "So, dude, what you gonna do?" There is when I figured out that, okay, this not only affecting me, it's affecting everybody around me, everybody that I'm touching, because it's kind of selfish.
That's right.
And when you're selfish, you don't realize that everything that you touch, I'm just gonna be honest, when you're selfish, everything that you touch, you're gonna fuck it up.
That's right.
And for me, it took, at first I had to admit that I had a problem. That was step one. Secondly, it took for somebody else to call me out on that problem for me to understand it. But like you said, I don't understand addiction. I just don't. I don't get it.
I don't get it.
I don't get it. Even I feel the same way with Bake. You know, when he had his alcohol problem, I felt like I was helping him because the thing is he wasn't doing. I was doing it for him. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until my wife told me, it was like, how you gonna ever be a man if you don't let him? Mm-hmm. And I said that on the day he got married. I didn't know how to do it because I was so used to being there, picking up everything that he was missing. I got it. Because I knew he couldn't handle it. Until I allowed him to handle it, now look.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I believe, and this may help you guys understand it a little bit better of what addiction is. So when we talk about addiction, it's not the drug, so to speak, that's addictive. It's what we call dopamine. It is the pleasure. It is the feeling. They tell you all the time that drug dealer, that drug user is always chasing that first high, what it felt like the first time, right? Addiction isn't just a drug. Like I talked about earlier, addiction was at one time coffee. Addiction was at one time sugar. Addiction is anything that you chase because you like the feeling of it, but it's hurting you. And I'll say this to the Black community because we talked about it on the podcast before, is the food that you eat is an addiction. So when people say, I don't know, I can't diet, I don't know how you're so disciplined on not eating this or not eating that, because I understand the effects that it could have. I love the way a cheeseburger tastes. Anybody that knew me knew whenever I went to a restaurant, I was getting wings or a cheeseburger. Anywhere I went, wings or a cheeseburger, because I love the effect, no matter where I was at, that cheeseburger or wings gave to me. But I understood that it was a detriment to my health, body-wise, right? That's the same thing that alcohol does, drug does. When you're addicted to something because you like the way it tastes, you like the way it makes you feel, you like the way it takes you from reality, you like what it does to you in the moment, but you're not thinking about what happens in a few hours, right? So put this in perspective, if most people go to a restaurant and they eat a good meal and they belch and they sit back and they say, oh, that was good. And then later on, their stomach hurt and they say, man, dang, I wish I wouldn't have ate that. But it was so good in the moment that you couldn't say no. That's the way drugs is. It's so good in the moment. You don't care about the hangover the next day if you drink alcohol. You don't care about losing your job tomorrow. You don't care about your kids not seeing you. The only thing you're focused on is that short-term pleasure that you can get from sex, money, drugs, food. That's it. People, that's what we are humans are addicted to. Sex, drugs, money, food. Those are the only things that we are addicted to. And if you can't discipline your mind to get over what's in front of you, to think about a year from now, 2 years from now, your kids affect, the people around you affect, it's going to kill you. And that's what it's been doing to our people for decades. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. We love y'all. Peace.